83. My brother called. Mom died last night. I inherited everything. You get nothing. Then I smiled. I still remember the exact second my phone rang, because something inside me tightened before I even saw the name on the screen. It was late evening, the kind of quiet hour when the world slows down and thoughts grow louder. The sky outside my window had already turned dark, and the only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the wall clock. When I saw Daniel calling, my older brother, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. We hadn't spoken properly in years. Not since the slow, painful unraveling of our family. Not since Mom chose sides. Not since money, resentment, and silence replaced what used to be love. I answered anyway. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. There was no greeting, no pause, no warmth. "Mom died last night," Daniel said flatly. "I inherited everything. You get nothing." That was it. No condolences. No shared grief. No acknowledgement that the woman who brought us into this world was gone. Just facts. Sharp. Final. Almost triumphant. For a moment, I didn't speak. Not because I didn't understand, but because my mind was racing faster than my heart could keep up with. My mother was dead. Gone. And my brother had just told me I was erased from her life in the most brutal way possible. And yet, I smiled. Not because I was happy. Not because I felt victorious. But because, deep down, I had already won something Daniel never would. To understand why I smiled, you have to understand where this all began. Growing up, Daniel was the golden child. The one who could do no wrong. He was louder, more confident, more demanding, and Mom adored him for it. Teachers praised him, relatives admired him, and Mom defended him even when he was clearly in the wrong. I was the quiet one, the observer, the fixer, the one who stayed up late helping Mom with bills, who ran errands without being asked, who learned early that love in our house wasn't guaranteed, it was earned. Still, when we were kids, I believed family meant permanence. I believed blood outweighed favoritism. I believed Mom loved us both equally, just differently. I was wrong. The shift happened after Dad died. His death didn't just leave a hole in our lives. It created a battlefield. Suddenly, money mattered. Ownership mattered. Control mattered. Daniel moved back home to help Mom, but his version of helping looked a lot like taking over. He handled her finances, decided what she spent, who visited, and eventually, who mattered. I lived 2 states away then. I called Mom every week. Sometimes she sounded warm, sometimes distracted. Occasionally, she'd cut the call short, saying Daniel needed her help with something urgent. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then the visits stopped. Whenever I tried to come see her, there was always an excuse. "She's tired. She's not feeling well. This isn't a good time." Slowly, carefully, Daniel built a wall between us, brick by brick, lie by lie. The first real warning came during a holiday visit. I showed up unannounced one afternoon, hoping to surprise Mom. Instead, I walked into tension so thick it felt physical. Daniel stood in the doorway like a guard, his expression unreadable. "She's resting," he said. "You should have called first." "I drove 6 hours," I replied. "I just want to see her." Reluctantly, he let me in. Mom looked smaller than I remembered. Frielier, older. She smiled when she saw me, but there was hesitation in her eyes, like she was checking whether it was safe to be happy. That's when I knew something was wrong. We spoke quietly while Daniel hovered nearby, correcting her memories, finishing her sentences, steering the conversation. When I hugged her goodbye, she held on a little too tightly. That was the last time I saw her alive. After that visit, the calls became less frequent. Sometimes Mom wouldn't answer at all. Other times, Daniel would pick up instead. "She's sleeping. She's confused today. She doesn't want to talk right now." Eventually, even the excuses stopped. Months passed, then years. I sent letters, cards, messages. No response. Part of me wanted to fight harder, to show up again, to demand answers. But another part of me was exhausted, tired of pushing against doors that were clearly being held shut. And so, painfully, I stepped back, not because I stopped caring, but because I had to protect myself. So when Daniel called that night, announcing Mom's death like a business transaction, I wasn't shocked. I had grieved her long before she died. I had grieved every missed birthday, every unanswered call, every memory I wasn't allowed to be part of. What surprised me wasn't his cruelty. It was how calm I felt hearing it. "You get nothing," he repeated, almost daring me to react. There was a pause. He was waiting for anger, for begging, for tears. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Okay." That threw him off. "You're not upset?" he asked. I said, "Okay." I replied again. Because what Daniel didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that inheritance wasn't the victory he thought it was. After the call ended, I sat there in silence, phone still in my hand. Then I smiled, not out of spite, not out of denial, but out of clarity. I realized something in that moment that changed everything. Daniel inherited things. I inherited freedom. He inherited the house filled with tension. I inherited peace. He inherited Mom's unresolved guilt. I inherited the ability to move forward. And more importantly, he inherited a truth he didn't yet understand. What Daniel didn't know was that money had never defined my worth. Property had never defined my future. And my mother's approval, though I had wanted it deeply, was not the measure of my value. But there was more, much more, something Daniel assumed didn't exist, something he believed he had erased. And that assumption would cost him everything.
For more inspiring and heart-touching stories like this, please subscribe to our channel.
After I hung up the phone, the silence in my apartment felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when something long anticipated finally arrives. I set my phone down, walked to the window, and stared out at the city lights below. People were living their lives completely unaware that my mother had died, that my family, whatever was left of it, had just reached its breaking point. I didn't cry that night. That surprised me. Instead, memories surfaced one by one, not violently, but patiently, like they had been waiting for permission. And with them came the truth Daniel never bothered to look for. Daniel liked to think the will was his greatest victory, that by inheriting everything, he had somehow proven he was the better son, the chosen one, the deserving one. But the truth was, the will was only the final act in a much longer story of manipulation. Years before Mom's health began to fail, I noticed small changes. Daniel insisted on handling her paperwork to make things easier. He drove her to appointments and answered questions directed at her. He started using phrases like, "Mom gets confused," and "she doesn't remember things clearly anymore." At first, I believed him. Then I noticed how selective that confusion was. She remembered Daniel's needs perfectly. She remembered his schedules, his preferences, his complaints. But when it came to me, she seemed distant, uncertain, hesitant. That wasn't illness. That was influence. Daniel never raised his voice. He never made scenes. That wasn't his style. His power came from quiet control. He decided who Mom spoke to, what information she received, what version of reality she lived in. If I sent gifts, they were misplaced. If I wrote letters, they were forgotten. If I called, he'd say she was sleeping, or worse, that she didn't want to talk. And slowly, painfully, I realized something devastating. Mom didn't know the full truth. She only knew the version Daniel allowed her to see. There was one conversation I never forgot. I had finally reached Mom directly, after weeks of unanswered calls. Her voice sounded tired but familiar. "Why don't you call me anymore?" she asked softly. My heart dropped. "I do," I said. "All the time." There was a pause. Daniel's voice entered the background. "She gets confused," he said, loudly enough for me to hear. "You know that." Mom didn't respond. That was the moment I stopped fighting, because I realized that no matter how loud I spoke, Daniel would always speak louder, right beside her, reshaping reality in real time. And I refused to turn my love for my mother into a war. There was one conversation I never forgot. I had finally reached Mom directly, after weeks of unanswered calls. Her voice sounded tired but familiar. "Why don't you call me anymore?" she asked softly. My heart dropped. "I do," I said. "All the time." There was a pause. Daniel's voice entered the background. "She gets confused," he said, loudly enough for me to hear. "You know that." Mom didn't respond. That was the moment I stopped fighting, because I realized that no matter how loud I spoke, Daniel would always speak louder, right beside her, reshaping reality in real time. And I refused to turn my love for my mother into a war. Letting go wasn't weakness. It was survival. I stepped back not because I didn't care, but because staying meant slowly losing myself. Every ignored message chipped away at my dignity. Every blocked visit reopened wounds that never healed. So I chose distance. I built a life that didn't revolve around begging for acknowledgement. I focused on my career, my relationships, my peace. And in doing so, I unknowingly prepared myself for the day Daniel would try to hurt me one last time. Daniel believed inheritance meant victory. He didn't understand that inheritance can also be a burden. Along with the house, he inherited responsibility. Along with the money, he inherited unanswered questions. Along with Mom's possessions, he inherited her silence. And silence has a way of speaking, especially when secrets are involved. Because what Daniel didn't know was that Mom had reached out to me once, quietly, secretly, behind his back. 2 years before she died, I received a letter. No return address. Handwritten. I recognized her handwriting instantly. She apologized. Not directly, not dramatically, but honestly. She wrote about confusion, about feeling pressured, about not always understanding what was happening around her. She admitted she felt guilty for how things turned out between us, but said she didn't know how to fix it without causing more conflict. She ended the letter with one sentence I will never forget. Some things aren't written down, but that doesn't mean they aren't true. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. Now I did. You see, wills can be changed. Documents can be altered. Assets can be transferred. But truth has a way of surviving, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to surface. Daniel assumed cutting me out meant I was gone forever. But you can't erase someone who never disappeared. 2 weeks after the funeral, one I was never told about, I received another call. This time, Daniel sounded different. Less confident, less controlled. There's some paperwork, he said. Old accounts. Things I don't understand. I listened without interrupting. There are records, he continued. Things Mom set up years ago. Before Dad died, my smile returned, but this time it was sharper, because Daniel had finally realized something important. He inherited what he could see, but not everything was visible. Daniel thought the story ended with that phone call, with his announcement, with his victory. He was wrong. That call wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything he tried to avoid. The truth, the consequences, and the reckoning he never prepared for. And I was done staying silent. Daniel didn't call again for several days after that strange conversation. The silence between us returned, but this time it felt different. It wasn't avoidance anymore. It was confusion. He had opened a door he didn't know how to close, and now he was standing in the hallway, unsure of what he might find next. Meanwhile, I went about my life calmly. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I slept peacefully. There was no anxiety clawing at my chest. No urge to explain myself. No need to prove anything. That surprised even me, because I knew something Daniel didn't. Years earlier, long before Mom's health declined, she and I had a private conversation during one of my visits. Daniel had stepped out to run errands, and for once, the house felt quiet and safe. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from. "I worry about your brother," she said. That caught me off guard. "He's so controlling," she continued softly. "He doesn't mean to be cruel, but he believes love means ownership." I didn't respond. I didn't want to betray Daniel, even then. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're different," she said. "You let people breathe." That conversation stayed with me for years, and it mattered more than Daniel would ever understand. What Daniel never realized was that Mom had been more aware than he gave her credit for. She knew he was pushing me out. She knew he was shaping the narrative. And she knew confrontation would only make things worse. So she took a quieter path. Over time, she made small, deliberate decisions. Ones that didn't require Daniel's permission or awareness. Accounts that didn't carry his name. Documents stored outside the house. Conversations held with professionals Daniel never met. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough. When Daniel finally called again, his voice had lost its edge. "There's a problem," he said. I leaned back in my chair, listening. "Some of the money. It's not accessible," he continued. "The bank says it was set up years ago. They won't release anything without additional authorization. Whose authorization? I asked calmly. There was a pause. Yours, he said. That was the moment his certainty cracked. Daniel believed that inheriting everything meant absolute control. He didn't understand that ownership without understanding is just illusion. He had the house, but not the context. He had the documents, but not the history. He had the authority, but not the full picture. And the more he pushed, the more the truth resisted him. People assume fairness means equal distribution, but fairness isn't about numbers. It's about intention. Mom didn't choose me because I was perfect. She chose me because I was patient, because I didn't manipulate, because I didn't demand loyalty in exchange for love. She trusted me to do what Daniel never could. Let go. A week later, Daniel suggested we meet. In person. That alone told me how far things had shifted. We met in a quiet office downtown, surrounded by polished wood and neutral colors. A legal advisor sat between us, shuffling papers. Daniel avoided my eyes. There are discrepancies, the advisor explained. Certain assets require joint acknowledgement. Daniel stiffened. Joint, he repeated. Yes, the advisor said. Your mother structured it that way. Daniel turned to me, anger flickering beneath his confusion. You knew about this, he said. I shook my head. I knew she was careful. Daniel wanted a villain, someone to blame. But there was no dramatic betrayal, no secret plot, just a mother who understood her children better than they understood her. The meeting ended without resolution. Daniel left furious. I left calm, because I understood something fundamental. Power built on control always collapses. Power built on trust endures. And Daniel had built everything on control. Now, the decision rested with me. I could fight him, take what I was legally entitled to, turn the situation into the battle he expected. Or I could do something he never anticipated, something that would end the conflict, not escalate it. And that choice would define everything that came next. Daniel thought the meeting unsettled me. In reality, it clarified everything. For the first time since Mom's death, the roles had reversed. He was no longer the one dictating terms, deciding access, controlling outcomes. He was reacting, and that made him reckless. The days following that meeting were filled with tension. Emails from lawyers, requests for documentation, questions that couldn't be answered without me. Daniel hated that. He invited me to the house, not out of kindness, but necessity. The house had been Mom's sanctuary once. Now it felt like a museum of unresolved emotions. Every room carried memories Daniel couldn't escape, and I no longer needed to. He stood in the living room, arms crossed, his posture defensive. She wouldn't have done this without you, he said. I looked around slowly. She did, I replied, because she knew you'd never let her do it openly. What followed wasn't shouting. It was worse. Truth. Daniel accused me of abandonment. I accused him of suffocation. He said I left when things got hard. I said he made it impossible to stay. For the first time, neither of us softened the words. Daniel finally said the thing he had avoided his entire life. I was afraid she loved you more. The room went quiet. That fear had shaped everything. His control, his manipulation, his obsession with inheritance. And suddenly, it all made sense. I could have taken my share. Legally, I had every right. But I wasn't interested in punishment. I don't want the house, I said, or the money. Daniel stared at me. I want honesty, I continued. And I want this to end. Daniel didn't understand. He thought wealth was leverage. I knew peace was. By stepping away, I took something from him he couldn't recover, his narrative. He kept the assets, but he lost control. And control was everything to him. Daniel stood alone in a house full of things. I walked away with something far more valuable. Freedom. Walking away from a house felt unreal. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just quiet. The front door closed behind me with a soft click, and for a moment, I stood on the porch listening to the sound fade. That house had been the center of our family for decades. Birthdays, arguments, laughter, silence. And now it belonged to Daniel alone. Every room filled with echoes he would have to live with. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. What Daniel never understood was that control only works when someone is willing to fight for it. Once I stepped out of the struggle, his power lost its shape. He began calling more often, not angry now, but unsettled. People are asking questions, he said once. Lawyers keep calling, he said another time. Without me pushing back, he had nothing solid to stand against, only the weight of his own decisions. And guilt is heavier than anger. Daniel inherited everything, but nothing felt secure anymore. Friends grew distant. Relatives questioned his version of events. Even the house seemed to resist him. Pipes breaking, documents missing, memories surfacing in places he tried to avoid. Victory without peace is not victory at all. Meanwhile, my life continued. Not dramatically improved, not magically healed, just steady. I woke up without dread. I slept without replaying old conversations. I no longer checked my phone hoping for messages that never came. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Weeks later, I found Mom's letter again, the one she sent before she died. I hadn't read it in a long time. This time, I noticed something I missed before. A date. It matched the day she quietly rearranged certain accounts, the same ones now causing Daniel so much trouble. She had planned carefully, not out of revenge, out of protection. Mom wasn't weak. She was tired of conflict, tired of choosing sides, tired of watching love turn into competition. Her silence wasn't approval. It was endurance. And in the end, she found a way to speak without escalating the war. The final call came unexpectedly. I don't sleep here anymore, Daniel admitted. The house feels wrong. I didn't respond. I thought winning would make things easier, he said. It didn't. That was the closest he ever came to an apology. We didn't reconcile. We didn't fight. We simply existed, separately. And sometimes, that is the healthiest outcome. I didn't inherit money. I inherited perspective. I learned that love doesn't demand proof. That peace doesn't need validation. That walking away is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. This wasn't the end yet, but it was close. Because some stories don't conclude with celebration. They end with understanding. And understanding had finally arrived. Time didn't heal everything, but it softened the edges. Weeks passed, then months. The urgency faded. Lawyers stopped calling. The tension that once lived in my chest loosened its grip. What remained wasn't anger or sadness. It was awareness. I had stepped out of a storm, and for the first time, I could see it clearly from the outside. Daniel withdrew. Not dramatically, not visibly. He simply became smaller in my life. His calls slowed, then stopped. Occasional messages came through, practical, brief, emotionless. Updates about paperwork. A question about an old document. Nothing more. I answered when necessary. No bitterness. No worms. Just clarity. The house did what I couldn't. It confronted him. Every room reminded him of control he no longer had. Every corner held a version of Mom that didn't match the story he told himself. He tried to sell it once. Backed out at the last minute. Some things aren't easy to release when they carry too much truth. I stopped avoiding memories. I let them surface naturally. Some were painful. Some were tender. Some were confusing. But none of them owe me anymore. That's the difference between memory and attachment. Power doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from knowing when to stop having them. Daniel believed power was something you took. I learned it's something you keep. The final message from Daniel came on a quiet morning. I think Mom knew what she was doing, he wrote. That was all. No apology. No explanation. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. Mom didn't leave me assets. She left me freedom from resentment, from expectation, from unfinished conversations. She trusted me to understand what Daniel never could. I finally understood why I smiled when Daniel called. Because I wasn't losing anything. I was being released. This story was never about inheritance. It was about identity, about choosing peace over pride, clarity over control, freedom over ownership. Life didn't change dramatically. It simply felt honest. And that honesty was everything. There's a strange moment that comes after every long conflict. Not relief, not victory, acceptance. It arrives quietly, without asking permission, and once it settles in, you realize something important. The battle is over, not because someone won, but because you chose not to fight anymore. That was where I finally found myself. I used to think closure meant answers, an apology, an explanation, a moment where everything made sense. But closure doesn't come from other people. It comes from deciding that your peace matters more than their understanding. When I thought about Daniel now, there was no anger left, just distance. Emotional, necessary distance. And surprisingly, gratitude. Because without him, I might never have learned the difference between attachment and love. Grief isn't always tears. Sometimes it's a quiet realization that the relationship you hoped for never existed the way you imagined it. I grieved my mother twice. Once when she died, and once when I accepted who she was, and who she wasn't able to be. That second grief was harder, but it was also freeing. Life is not fair, but fairness isn't the same as meaning. Daniel thought fairness meant ownership. I learned fairness means alignment, being at peace with who you are and how you live. I didn't get the inheritance, but I also didn't inherit bitterness. Daniel needed to win because he was afraid. Afraid of being second. Afraid of being unloved. Afraid of being unseen. Winning was how he proved his worth to himself. I didn't need that proof anymore. Months later, I drove past the house. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just noticed how small it looked. That place once held so much power over me. Now it was just another building, another memory, another chapter already written. That's when I knew I was truly done. Silence gave me perspective. It taught me that not every story needs to be corrected. Not every lie needs to be challenged. Not every injustice needs revenge. Some things lose their power when you stop feeding them. People ask why I smiled. They assume it was arrogance, or confidence, or revenge. It wasn't. I smiled because I finally understood something Daniel never would. Nothing that truly mattered could be taken from me. Not my character, not my values, not my future. My mother didn't teach me this intentionally. She taught me through absence, through mistakes, through silence. She showed me that love without courage can still hurt people, and that sometimes the best gift a parent gives isn't what they leave behind, but what they force you to become. I chose a different ending than the one written for me. Not the bitter child, not the disinherited sibling, not the victim. I chose to be free. Family doesn't always mean loyalty. Love doesn't always mean protection. And inheritance doesn't always mean wealth. Sometimes, inheritance is the lesson that sets you free. I didn't look back, because there was nothing left there for me. Only echoes. And I had already learned to live without them.